Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 435 chainsaw. The customer complaint is that it won't idle down. The idle is inconsistent and a lot of times it runs fast. So with all of my repairs, the first thing I usually do is look into the fuel tank. I want to know what kind of fuel I have in the tank, if it's fresh, if there's any water in the bottom of the tank, or what the fuel filter looks like. I'll also check the fuel hose for any holes by pressurizing it, putting 10 pounds of pressure on it. And if it holds, I can assume that the hose is good and the carburetor's tight. So you're thinking to yourself, a fast idle, that could be an air leak. If you have an air leak in the crankcase and the saw is running lean, it's going to run a little bit fast. It could be a throttle linkage issue where the saw is compromised in such a way that the linkage is bound up, or there's just something physically wrong with the trigger mechanism. Anything like that. There's got to be slack in the throttle rod or cable in order for the saw to come to a complete idle. Another possibility is carburetor adjustments, whether the adjustments were messed with or if someone turned up the idle speed. Here I'm looking at the linkage itself. I should note that I had just looked in the cylinder to check for scoring and it was good. So this looks like the throttle is holding open physically and I can push the throttle shaft closed just a little bit. Well, let's run it and see what it acts like. Well, you can see that it wasn't running too fast, but it also wasn't settling all the way down into an idle because I could push the linkage and physically make it slow down. So some binding is going on here, whether it be in the throttle rod or in the carburetor itself. Let's try it again. So if I open the throttle up, it idles a little high, and if I push physically down on the throttle shaft, it idles down lower. Now I'm going to remove the throttle rod. We'll try it again. You can see that if I push down on the shaft manually, it idled down some. So the throttle rod wasn't holding it open. Something else is holding it open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the carburetor off and investigate the carburetor itself and see if I can find a physical reason why the throttle shaft is holding open a little bit. It's not a lot, but it's just enough that it won't settle down to the idle stop screw. So, what we want to do, what am I doing here? Well, I'm looking at the linkage to make sure there's no binding on the other side of the carburetor. And there's not. It's not settling all the way down to the stop screw. And something's holding the throttle shaft open. So to remove this carburetor, there's going to be a screw on the top and two screws side by side on the bottom. We'll get all three of these backed out of here. Here's one. Here's another. So I just removed the rubber boot or saddle from the air filter base so I could lift that up a little bit and get at this screw better. It's not coming out very easy at all. It's kind of binding. See if I can get it with a magnet. There we go. It's just kind of tucked away in there. All right, our air filter base, we're going to just pull that out of the way. Pull the fuel line off of the purge bulb. That was the return line. That would be on the long stem of the purge bulb. And then we're going to pull the fuel line off the short stem of the purge bulb. That's the one that goes to the carburetor. Here's a clip that holds the carburetor to the intake boot. Once we release that clip, the carb is pretty much free to come off. We're just going to pop off that main fuel line that has a filter on the end of it. So here's our carburetor. We're looking at the function or the action of the throttle plate, and it doesn't look right. It doesn't look like it's settling all the way down into a closed position. So what we're going to do is I want to show that to you a little bit better. I'll clean this up here. Just blowing the schmutz off of it. And examining the carburetor to look for any physical damage or problems. And everything looks pretty normal. I can turn that throttle shaft. It acts the way it should. There's no binding that I can feel. But it's not closing all the way. And let me show that to you. I'm going to get a light and put it behind there. And you can see quite a bit of light sneaking past that throttle plate at full idle, or settled all the way down to the lowest idle position. It's still holding open a little bit. Well, that would be normal if it was against the idle stop screw, but it's not. Take a good look. See that light beaming through there? It should be sealed a little bit better than that. All right, we've established that the plate's not closing. Why would that be? Well, this happens from time to time. That screw, even though it seems kind of tight, it must have come loose a little bit, allowed that plate to move. You know, if nobody was in here jacking around, it happened on its own, unless it was like that from brand new and nobody said anything till now. But all I'm going to do is loosen that screw and then tighten it back down, and that'll allow the shaft to return to idle and the plate to kind of center itself in there. Now, I'll snug this down a little bit here. Oh, I guess I'm backing it off first. You know, the screw is crimped on the end so that you can't back it all the way out. You're going to start backing it out of the shaft and it's going to bind because it's crimped on the end. But what I want to do is put a little bit of Loctite on the threads and screw that screw back in there, and hopefully it won't come loose again. And I kind of got the Loctite all over the place there, and it's not really what I wanted to do. Didn't want to get any Loctite down into idle speed orifice in the carburetor either. So I got the screw tightened back down. I think I got the plate centered. We'll snug it pretty good, and then I'm going to wipe away that excess Loctite. And I kind of got a bunch in there. I didn't want to back the screw all the way out and straighten out that crimp on the end of the screw. I wanted to leave it so that, you know, that screw can't get lost in the engine if it backed out. All right, so re-examining this, It looks pretty good, so I'm going to kind of torque it down for good here. Let's put that light behind here and see what it looks like. All right, if you compared the two, it's definitely a lot less light shining through there than it was before. And if we actually fixed it, we'll know once we put this back together. So to get this carburetor back on the 435, this is the way I like to do it. First, I'm going to put the fuel line on here. It's just easy to do right now. And then the carburetor can snap up to the intake boot, and it's going to hold there in place. Now we got to get that air filter base where it belongs. And the red lever's got to go over the choke shaft. We want to make sure that's in place. The line from the carburetor can go onto the short stem of the purge bulb. Kind of getting it right there. Get it pushed out all the way. This is pulling fuel through the carburetor into the purge bulb. Alright, red lever is over the choke shaft. Air filter base is kind of in place. Yeah, it looks alright. Just got a screw in here to hold it. Not going to torque this down. I'm just going to loosely assemble it. Now I'm going to put the two bottom screws in. And I won't tighten these down until I get all three screws in. That's about the right torque, I'd say. Snug to tight, but not overly tight. Here's our return line from the long stem of the purge bulb to the tank. Our rubber grommet will drop the air filter base into place on that grommet, or strap, or saddle, or whatever you want to call that. This is our throttle shaft locating clip. Just kind of getting oriented here. So that's the way we want to put it on over the top of the throttle rod. Push the throttle rod into the end of the trigger assembly and then snap the clip down into place. Get it all lined up. There we go. Snap down into place. We'll do a little function check here. When it's sitting at idle, it looks like I couldn't push it back down into any lower speed. So let's fire this thing back up again. Get some fuel in here. And I'm going to start it and see if it settles down to an idle where it belongs. And if it does, then that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 435 chainsaw that came in with a complaint that it wouldn't idle all the way down. Thanks for watching. Later.